She didn't speak. She didn't fight. She just stood there silent still and made the most feared girl in school crumble without lifting a finger. What kind of power does that take? Stay with us, because this isn't the story you think it is. Have you ever looked at someone and just known they were carrying a story, not because of anything they said, not because of how they dressed or moved, but because of what they didn't say? The kind of quiet that isn't timid, but calculated. Like a tide pulled so far back you can feel the tsunami rising just behind it. That was the energy Naomi Sinclair brought with her the day she walked into Ridgewood High. She didn't wear pain like a badge. She didn't march like she had something to prove. But there was something in the way she carried herself that felt loaded, like a fire sealed in ice, unshaken, unseen, and unwelcomed by the world that was about to cross her path. What no one realized then, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that they weren't staring at a lost transfer student trying to blend in. They were staring at the girl who was going to burn their entire social order to the ground, and she wasn't even going to raise her voice. So before you judge her for what you're about to hear, pause. Ask yourself, what would you do if silence was your last safe place? Because for Naomi, it wasn't about popularity, revenge, or even justice. It was about control, and she was about to show a school obsessed with noise exactly how terrifying silence could be. If this story speaks to you, if it makes you feel something, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. It's your support that gives us the fuel to bring more true, raw, and powerful stories like this to life. Now let's begin where it all started. The yellow bus hissed to a stop in front of Ridgewood High, a well-funded suburban fortress in the quiet shadow of Boston autumn. Leaves danced in the wind, clinging to a strange stillness as students poured out in bursts of laughter, noise, and motion. Naomi was the last to step off. She didn't linger, didn't hesitate. Her hoodie was pulled up just enough to shield part of her face from the morning chill. One strap of her backpack hung from her shoulder. She walked with a kind of poise that didn't scream confidence. It whispered it, and no one noticed, at least not yet. She moved past the fountains, the flag poles, the polished hallway that echoed with privilege and tradition. Her eyes didn't scan for friendship or familiarity. She didn't want to be seen. She wanted to finish, to graduate, get out, move on. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. They always stared when you didn't give them something to latch on to. And Naomi didn't give them anything. No introductions, no awkward smiles, no fake laughs. She found her locker, memorized the number, spun the combination dial like she'd done this 100 times before, which she had just in other cities, other schools, other lives. Her fingers worked mechanically, but her ears were tuned like radar. The glances had started already, the quiet kind, the kind that sliced through the air. She's new. Where's she from? She doesn't talk. That last one always came quickly, as if silence were a defect. But Naomi knew better. Silence is only dangerous when people don't know what it's hiding. She'd seen it before, how silence made predators nervous. Bullies craved reaction, and she had mastered the art of starving them. But Ridgewood wasn't just any school, it was a kingdom. And every kingdom has its queen. Her name was Sienna Harper, tall, blonde, wealthy, manipulative, in a way that didn't require effort. She didn't just lead the popular crowd, she curated it. Sienna's world was built on approval, aesthetics, and social control. Her table in the cafeteria wasn't just a table, it was a throne. Her words carried weight because everyone needed her validation, and she noticed Naomi within seconds. Not because Naomi tried to get noticed, but because she didn't, and that was enough. In the first period, Naomi sat in the back. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't meet the teacher's eyes. She took notes in perfect silence, and kept her shoulders tight inward-facing, guarded. She didn't look up when Sienna walked in late, her perfume clouding the air, her clique trailing behind her like decorative shadows. But she felt it, the gaze, the calculation. Sienna scanned the room and paused for a half-second too long when her eyes landed on the girl in the back new face. No makeup, dark skin, hoodie up. No effort to please, target acquired. Naomi didn't respond, didn't acknowledge, but deep down, she knew what was coming. It always came. Lunch was its own battlefield. Naomi entered the cafeteria and scanned the room like a chess player surveying the board. Too many groups, too many risks. Every seat came with its own price, so she chose the corner table. Alone, again. She took out her lunch, home-packed, wrapped neatly, and began eating with the kind of careful grace that said, "Don't engage me." The noise around her became a distant blur, until it wasn't, until Sienna's voice sliced through it, like silk over steel. "Well, well, look who thinks she's too good to say hi." Naomi didn't look up. "She's probably mute," Brittany chimed in, her laugh sharp. "Maybe she's just rude," added Lola, twirling a strand of perfect hair. Naomi picked up her bottle, took a slow sip of water, and kept chewing. They needed a reaction. She gave them nothing, so Sienna tried harder. She leaned forward and knocked Naomi's water bottle over, flooding the tray. A collective gasp ran through the cafeteria. Naomi paused, set her fork down, wiped her hands on a napkin, stood. Not a twitch of anger, not a flash of embarrassment. She picked up her tray, walked calmly to the trash, and dumped everything in. Then she laughed. Not loud, not sarcastic, just softly, enough to send a chill down Sienna's spine. Because it wasn't nervous laughter, it was measured, like someone saying, "I expected this." And that's when the room really went silent. Sienna stared at her as Naomi turned and walked away. Not fast, not in a rush, just steady, controlled. The crowd didn't know how to react. They looked at Sienna like maybe she was the one who looked weak. And Naomi. She just claimed her first win without throwing a single punch. That night, Naomi sat at her kitchen table in the tiny apartment she shared with her father, David Sinclair, watched her from the stove, flipping eggs with one hand and sipping coffee with the other. He didn't need to ask what happened. He could tell by the quiet tension in her shoulders. "She started it early, huh?" he said casually. Naomi didn't answer. He sat down across from her. "You all right?" She nodded. "I didn't fight." He raised an eyebrow. "But you wanted to." "I always want to," she admitted, voice quiet. He nodded slowly. "I trained you not just to fight, Naomi. I trained you to know when not to. That's the harder part." She looked at him, the memory of the spilled lunch still fresh behind her eyes. "They don't get it," she said. "They're not supposed to," David replied. "But someday they will." And they would, because Naomi Sinclair wasn't like the other girls who walked into Ridgewood High and shrank to fit its mold. She wasn't going to adapt. She wasn't going to break. She had already survived more than these people could imagine. And when the next round came, and it would come, she would be ready. They picked the wrong girl, and they were about to find out just how big a mistake that was. If this story gave you chills, if it made you pause and think even for a moment, subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell so you don't miss the rest of Naomi's journey. Stories like this deserve to be told, and your support helps us keep them alive. Now, before we continue with part 2, we'd love to hear from you. If you saw someone being harassed at school or work, what would you do? A step in, even if it's uncomfortable. B, stay out of it. Not your business. Type A or B in the comments below. Let's open the conversation, because silence can protect, but it can also destroy. The air in Ridgewood High shifted the day after Naomi Sinclair laughed in the cafeteria. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was suspicion. Whispers didn't trail her. They chased her. They clung to her backpack, her hair, her silence like static electricity, sparking behind her every move. She didn't even flinch. She laughed. After Sienna dumped water on her. "She's from Detroit, right? I bet she's hiding something." Naomi didn't need to turn around to hear them. She had lived too many lives in too many cities not to recognize the sound of shifting tides. What she hadn't expected. What made her jaw tighten as she walked through Ridgewood's manicured halls was how quickly silence could be misread as threat, and threat that made people dangerous. It was never the loudest scream that tore through a room. It was the unspoken fear that crept in underneath. She had become that fear, and it was only Tuesday. In second period, two students at the front of the room deliberately turned in their seats just to look at her. When she lifted her eyes to meet theirs, they turned back too quickly, like they'd stared into something they couldn't explain. In third, she heard one of Sienna's minions mutter, "She probably carries pepper spray." Another said, "No, she doesn't need it. Look at her hands." By the time lunch arrived, the cafeteria seemed to hum with a new tension. The table where Sienna usually held court was louder than normal. Forced laughter, overcompensated jokes, their voices lifted a notch too high like a performance, not quite hitting its mark. Naomi took her usual corner. She unwrapped her sandwich, peeled her orange, opened her book. Outside, leaves swept across the courtyard. Inside, she could feel the chill in the way the room turned ever so slightly toward her. The heat wasn't on her skin. It was in the way people waited as if she were a fire that might catch if they stared long enough. But Naomi had already decided she wouldn't give them a match. At least not yet. Across the room, Sienna Harper was unraveling, and everyone could see it, except her. The cafeteria had been hers for years, not just the table, the entire social ecosystem. She controlled it with subtle cues. A glance, a smirk, a lifted eyebrow. People followed because it was easier than being on the other side of her, until Naomi came. Until Naomi didn't follow the rules. Until Naomi didn't care. Brittany leaned in. "She didn't even cry yesterday." "She didn't get mad either," Lola added. "That's not normal." Sienna's fingers twitched against her tray. "She's not tough," Sienna whispered. "She's fake. It's an act. It's just for attention." "Then why does it feel like we're the ones pretending?" Lola asked, before realizing she said it out loud. Sienna didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her eyes were already scanning the room, narrowing like a lens. And Naomi sat there like a woman sculpted from stone, unmoving, unshakable, and unapologetically present. After school, Naomi lingered behind in the gym while the other students filed out. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't looking for anything at all. She just needed space. The kind of space only a near-empty gym could provide. She stood in the corner near the bleachers, eyes drifting across the hardwood floor. Her muscles ached to move to release the pressure that built in her chest, like steam under a sealed lid. She didn't hear him approach. At first. "I saw what you did yesterday," said a quiet voice. Naomi turned. A boy with shaggy hair and wire-frame glasses stood there, holding a sketch pad. She recognized him from chemistry. Miles Chen. He was quiet, always alone, always drawing. "I didn't do anything," Naomi replied. "That's what I mean," he said. "They were waiting for you to break, but you didn't." Naomi narrowed her eyes slightly. "Why does that matter to you?" Miles shrugged. "Because I used to be them, not the bullies exactly. Just afraid of not belonging. So I stayed invisible, and I thought that was power." "It can be," she said after a beat. "But it doesn't stop them," Miles added. "No," Naomi agreed. "It just delays them." They stood in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that doesn't ask to be filled. I'm working on a new comic, Miles said, inspired by you, sort of, but it's still too early to show anyone. Naomi smiled faintly. Let me guess. Mysterious new girl arrives in town, refuses to speak, but secretly has telekinetic powers. He smirked. Not far off. They shared a glance. It wasn't friendship yet, but it wasn't war, and that was enough. When Naomi got home, her father was already waiting. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, thumbing through the mail. His eyes flicked up the moment she entered. How bad? He asked. Not bad, she said. He raised a brow. Just brewing. He nodded, whispers, and stares. A few light bumps in the hallway. Some strategic laughter. David leaned back in his chair. They're testing. Naomi dropped her bag and joined him. It's only a matter of time. He set down his mug. I taught you to defend yourself, Naomi, but I also taught you to know when to stay still. A real fight doesn't start with fists. It starts with choice. I'm choosing, she said. He studied her for a long time, not suspiciously, just deeply. Do they know who they're pushing? Naomi met his eyes. Not yet. He nodded once. Then, they still have time to make a better decision. That night, Naomi opened her journal. She began listing details, comments made, who said them, where she was standing when she was bumped. She wrote them all down. Not out of fear, not for evidence, for clarity. Because what people forgot about quiet girls is that they often remember everything. They didn't just endure, they studied. And Naomi was studying everything. The next day, Ridgewood walked a little softer around her, not because she had done anything, but because she had done nothing for too long. People don't fear the person yelling in the hallway. They fear the person who doesn't blink while being yelled at. By noon, Sienna had already snapped at two people. She spilled her coffee on Brittany's binder, snapped at Lola for forgetting to tag her in a photo. She was slipping, and Ridgewood could smell blood. They didn't respect Naomi yet, but they no longer feared Sienna, because fear is only useful when no one's willing to challenge it, and Naomi didn't challenge it. She ignored it, and that was infinitely worse. Because to be ignored by someone you're trying to destroy means you've already lost your grip. In gym class that afternoon, it boiled over. Naomi was paired with Brittany during warm-up drills. Twice. Brittany elbowed her in the ribs. Neither time did Naomi react. During laps, Lola accidentally shoved her shoulder. Naomi didn't look back, but she clocked the smirk on Sienna's face across the room. She saw Jace and Derek watching from the bleachers, smirking like the scene was just warming up. She knew exactly where this was heading. And still, she didn't break. She stretched. She ran. She passed the basketball without hesitation. She jogged with a rhythm that said, I belong here more than you do. When class ended, Naomi left the gym last. She passed by Sienna without a word, but Sienna turned just slightly and watched her go with something new in her face. Not anger, not satisfaction. Doubt. And doubt, when you're used to control, is the first sign that you're no longer in charge. That night, Naomi stood in front of her mirror. She let the hoodie fall off her shoulders, let her breath settle, let her spine relax. She wasn't tired from being bullied. She was tired of pretending it wasn't coming, because it was. And when it did, she would not raise her voice. She would not record a video. She would not threaten revenge. She would act. Because Naomi Sinclair never started storms, but she always knew how to stand in them and still remain dry. Some storms arrive with thunder. Others come in silence, stealthy, creeping, disguised as calm. Naomi Sinclair woke up that Thursday with a strange stillness in her chest, the kind that didn't pulse with adrenaline or fear, but with something harder to name. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from peace, but from clarity. She dressed without rushing. She ate breakfast quietly while her father moved around the kitchen, humming softly to a jazz record that crackled on their old player. The smell of coffee filled the air, grounding her like a familiar scent in a burning forest. Her father didn't ask questions that morning. He just handed her a travel mug and rested a hand on her shoulder. It was enough, because they both knew the air had changed. The hallway at Ridgewood High greeted Naomi with the usual polished chill, bright lights, clean lines, faces that turned away too quickly. But today, there was something else. A pause. Like the moment before a dropped glass hits the floor. They were waiting for something. The whispers weren't as loud as the week before, but they were sharper. Focused, intentional. She's too quiet. It's weird. I heard she fought a teacher at her last school. I don't know. I think she's kind of terrifying. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't even blink, but inside she was cataloging each voice, each shift, each stare, like a map being drawn in real time. Every step she took through the hallway that day felt like stepping deeper into a maze built to test her patience. Every glance, every feigned accident, every stifled laugh, it was all part of a bigger orchestration. And the conductor, as always, was Sienna Harper. Sienna hadn't said anything directly since the cafeteria incident. That was the trap. She was waiting for Naomi to react, to snap, to push, to crack. So far, Naomi had given her nothing. Not rage, not shame, just presence. And that, more than anything, was what scared Sienna the most. Because silence that doesn't break becomes its own kind of violence, the kind that unravels things from the inside. In English class, Naomi sat at the back while Mr. Ellis handed out a new assignment. They were reading The Crucible, and he asked students to choose a character they related to. Most groaned. Some smirked. Sienna leaned over her desk and whispered something to Lola, loud enough for Naomi to catch. Maybe Naomi should choose Abigail. She knows all about manipulation. Naomi didn't lift her eyes. She just wrote one word on her paper: John, the man who stood in truth while the world burned around him. During lunch, Naomi ate alone again. But something had shifted even there. Students weren't just watching her now, they were waiting for something. A few glanced at their phones. Some were whispering more urgently. Sienna's table was loud, but the laughter had lost its music. Brittany scrolled through her phone with a forced grin. Jace leaned back, legs stretched arrogantly, watching Naomi like he was trying to measure something invisible. Derek Voss, as usual, had his phone tilted just enough to seem casual, yet clearly recording. Naomi stayed calm, but her breath had changed. It was slower, measured, like someone counting the beats before stepping into the ring. She didn't feel rage, she felt alignment. For days she had been pushed, nudged, humiliated in small, calculated ways. But this wasn't about ego. It wasn't about proving herself. It was about finishing something. She could feel it in the energy around her. Something was coming, and when it came, it would be public, and it would be personal, after school. Naomi didn't go straight home. She went to the old gym off campus, where her father taught part-time in the evenings. It was empty at that hour. The mats were rolled up. The bags hung still. She didn't train to fight. She trained to breathe. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Her footwork whispered against the padded floor muscle memory, guiding her through motions that didn't belong to rage, but to rhythm. Inhale, step, pivot, block, control. Each motion reminded her who she was, not what they wanted her to be. Her father entered quietly. He didn't interrupt. He just leaned on the wall, arms crossed, watching. When she finished, he handed her a towel. "You're not sparring," he noted. I'm preparing, Naomi replied. For what? I think they've set something up. David didn't speak immediately. He let her words settle between them. Behind the gym, he asked softly. Naomi nodded. I haven't heard it said out loud, but I've seen enough signs. It's classic crowd. No teachers, probably. After the last bell. You going? She looked up at him. Of course. Why she didn't blink. Because it's not about me anymore. He studied her in silence. Then you remember the rule? Naomi nodded. I don't start it. He raised an eyebrow. But I end it. David exhaled slowly. I know your strength, Naomi, but I want you to remember this. Real power isn't just stopping the fight. It's making sure it never has to happen again. She looked at him, eyes steady. That's exactly what I plan to do. That night, she opened her journal and didn't write an entry. Instead, she tore a single page out. On it, she had drawn a circle, dozens of small dots around the perimeter. In the center, she'd sketched a single figure, unmoving, stable. The caption beneath it read, You cannot move what refuses to play. She folded the page once, then twice, and placed it inside her hoodie pocket. The next morning, Ridgewood was buzzing before first period. The rumors had arrived ahead of her. By the time she stepped off the bus, students were already glancing, whispering, checking their screens. She passed a cluster of juniors who abruptly quieted when she walked by. Someone dropped a "see you after school" loud enough to echo. Naomi didn't look back. The final bell of the day rang with a weight that felt ceremonial. Students spilled into the hallways with a specific direction. They weren't going home. They were heading to the back of the school where the gym wall cast long shadows across the cracked pavement and no security cameras ever reached. Naomi took her time packing her bag. She walked out of the building alone, her pace, even her breath calm. As she turned the corner, she saw it. A loose circle of students forming like the eye of a storm. At its center, standing like a figurehead, sculpted from defiance, was Sienna Harper, flanked by Jace, Derek Brittany, and Lola. She wore the same smug expression Naomi had seen on people like her before. People who mistook crowds for power. People who mistook numbers for strength. Naomi stepped into the circle, and the world for a moment went still. Her heartbeat didn't quicken. Her hands didn't shake. She wasn't walking into a fight. She was walking into a decision. Because what Sienna didn't realize was this: Naomi hadn't come to show her strength. She'd come to end the illusion that Sienna had any. And the moment was finally here. The sky over Ridgewood High was beginning to darken when Naomi Sinclair stepped around the side of the gym. The air had thickened. Not from rain, but from something else. The way a room feels just before a hard truth is spoken aloud. She heard them before she saw them. Voices clustering, too excited to be casual, too loud to be innocent. A circle had formed behind the building just past the reach of security cameras, out of sight from the school's polished windows and carefully maintained image. A crowd waited. She had been right. She had felt it. Days before it happened, smelled it in the air like smoke before flame, but it didn't scare her. It never had, because you don't fear a fire when you've lived inside one. As she stepped fully into the open, the talking stopped. Phones tilted discreetly upward. A ripple moved through the bodies. Whispers turned into expectation. There she was. Naomi, the girl who refused to bow. At the center of the circle stood Sienna Harper with her perfectly curled hair, designer sneakers, and her loyal trio surrounding her like ornaments on a crown. Jace Harper towered nearby, his arms crossed over his chest. Derek Voss stood with one hand in his pocket, phone already recording. Naomi didn't say a word. She walked to the center like she'd been here before, like she belonged in the eye of the storm. Her face was blank. Her shoulders relaxed. She stopped a few feet from Sienna and met her gaze. Not with defiance, not with rage, but with something more unsettling. Stillness. Sienna smirked, but the edge of it wavered. "You're braver than I thought. I figured you'd disappear like you always do." Naomi's voice was quiet, but it carried. "You've been watching me this whole time, but you haven't seen a thing." Laughter came from the crowd, nervous, unsure. Sienna's eyes narrowed. "You think you're scary?" she asked, stepping forward. "You think walking around like some mute monk makes you powerful? This is high school, not a movie." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Then why does it feel like you're performing?" A murmur rippled around them. Sienna flushed, her lips twitched, caught between rage and uncertainty. Jace stepped forward instinctively protective. "You want us to take you seriously," he said. "Then act like you're worth the attention." Naomi's gaze didn't flicker. "I didn't ask for attention. You chased it for me." Jace barked a laugh. "You think this silence act makes you special. You're not deep. You're just scared." "No," Naomi replied. "But you should be." That was the last straw. Jace's body moved before his mind did a quick, aggressive lunge, fist cocked back all weight, and force barreling forward. The crowd surged back instinctively, a gasp pulling across the circle, but Naomi had already moved. She didn't dodge. She stepped into him. With one precise shift, she caught his arm mid-swing, twisted at the elbow, pivoted under his body weight, and redirected his momentum so violently that he flipped sideways. He hit the ground with a breathless thud. The air knocked from his chest in one sickening exhale. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't anticipation. It was fear. Jace groaned on the pavement, rolling to his side, stunned not by pain, but by the impossibility of what had just happened. Naomi took 2 steps back. "Don't stand if you don't understand who you're standing against." Derek tried to save the moment. "You just got lucky." He spat, stepping in. "You're not the only one who can throw a punch." He charged less confident, more reckless. Naomi didn't flinch. As he neared, she shifted her footing slightly and deflected his momentum, stepping to his side, catching his wrist mid-swing, and flipping him into a shoulder lock so fluidly it looked choreographed. Derek shouted in pain as his knees buckled. Naomi released him before he hit the ground. He stumbled backward, panting, arm cradled to his chest, and looked at her, not like she was a girl but a riddle he had no hope of solving. The crowd said nothing. No cheers, no mockery, only awe. Naomi stood at the center of the silence she'd cultivated. Only now, it wasn't hers alone. It belonged to them, to Ridgewood, too, to the students who had thought they knew what strength looked like, loud, brash, full of threat. But Naomi had changed the equation. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She had let them write their story, and then she had ended it. Sienna stared at her like someone watching a tower fall that she had always assumed was hers. "You think you've proven something?" she asked. "You want people to think you're untouchable." Naomi didn't answer, so Sienna did what people always do when they feel power slipping through their fingers. She got desperate. She lunged, not with a punch, not with planning, just a raw feral reach for Naomi's hair like she was trying to grab something that might ground her before she drowned. Naomi caught her wrist mid-air gently, firmly, and then, for the first time, Naomi stepped forward and looked at her, not with hatred, with disappointment. "You don't have power," she said. "You have control issues, and I'm not your mirror." She let go. Sienna stumbled back, her face unreadable, her body too stunned to respond. Naomi turned. She didn't raise a fist. She didn't lift her chin. She just walked away. And that, That was the blow no one could recover from. Not Jace, who was still on the ground, not Derek clutching his arm, not Sienna, whose kingdom had dissolved in a single afternoon. Because power built on fear collapses the moment someone shows you what courage actually looks like. Naomi didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Her silence was no longer misunderstood. It was understood too well. As she left the circle, the crowd parted without a word. Phones were still recording, but now hands trembled. Students who had once laughed now looked down, not in shame, in respect, because Naomi hadn't just defended herself, she had ended something bigger, the tyranny of noise, the culture of cruelty, and she had done it without raising her voice once. As she walked home, the evening light stretched long shadows across the pavement. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from her father. "You okay?" she replied simply. "I finished it," he responded a moment later. "Then let it be done." She didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth revisiting. She had arrived at Ridgewood to graduate and disappear, but instead she had become something else entirely. Not a hero, not a rebel, something quieter, something stronger, a new blueprint for power. One built not on intimidation, but on integrity, and Ridgewood would never be the same again. The following Monday, Ridgewood High stood just as polished and pristine as it always had. The bell rang with its usual shrillness. Students shuffled into classrooms. The announcements crackled through the intercom, but under the surface, something had fractured. Or maybe something had healed. The courtyard was quieter, not silent but hushed in a new way, like someone had finally spoken the truth, and now no one quite knew how to return to pretending. Naomi Sinclair walked through the front entrance without a single glance thrown her way, not because they didn't see her, because they finally understood her. Power didn't cling to her presence the way it did to people who begged for it. It didn't scream. It didn't shout. It pulsed quietly, steadily, like gravity, irrefutable and constant. She didn't rush to class. She moved like someone who no longer needed to measure her steps or anticipate attacks. Something had ended, but something else, something far more important had begun. In the cafeteria, students who had once avoided her now stole glances, some with admiration, some with guilt, and some with a new kind of curiosity, the kind reserved for people who didn't fit the mold but reshaped the room just by entering it. She sat alone, just like before, but this time, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like choice. Across the room, Sienna Harper sat at her usual table, but nothing about it felt usual anymore. Brittany stared at her phone, pretending not to notice the silence between them. Lola peeled the label off a water bottle head down. Derek hadn't spoken since Friday, and Jace, though, present in body, stared through his tray like he was still lying on the pavement behind the gym. The invisible thread that once held them together had snapped. And Sienna knew why. It wasn't just because she lost. It was how she lost. Because when you rule through fear and someone shows the whole world that fear can be dismantled with dignity, you lose everything. Sienna tried to smile, tried to hold her spine straight, tried to laugh at something. Brittany mumbled. But the room didn't turn toward her anymore. It didn't orbit her. It had shifted slowly, subtly, irrevocably toward someone else. And that someone had no intention of sitting on any throne. That was the part that stung the most. Naomi wasn't interested in replacing Sienna. She wasn't trying to take her crown. She had tossed the entire concept of the crown into the fire and then walked away. At the edge of the cafeteria, Miles Chen approached Naomi's table with a hesitant nod. He held a small sketchbook in his hand, worn and frayed at the corners. "Got a minute?" he asked, voice soft. Naomi looked up and gestured to the seat across from her. He sat, then flipped open the sketchbook to a single page. It was her, standing in the circle, behind the gym. Not mid-fight, not in motion, just standing still grounded, unmoving. Around her, the crowd was blurred, faces undefined, but Naomi's figure was detailed on lines, crisp, expression composed, eyes unwavering. The title above read, "The Moment the Noise Stopped." Naomi studied it for a moment, then looked up. "Thank you," she said. Miles shrugged. "I think people needed to see it the way I did. You make me look more composed than I felt." "You look like that to us," he replied. Naomi didn't smile, but something inside her softened. She had never cared for recognition, but truth that mattered. She stood up and handed the sketchbook back. Her movements deliberate. "Walk with me," she asked. Miles nodded. They moved through the hallways, quiet but side by side. Students passed them, some offering quiet nods, some still uncertain. Naomi didn't seek their approval, but she met their eyes one by one and held their gaze. There was no shame in being seen anymore. Later that afternoon, Mr. Ellis stopped Naomi just outside his classroom. "I heard what happened." He said. Naomi didn't reply. "I also heard how you handled it." Still, Naomi said nothing. "You didn't just defend yourself," he added. "You redefined what defense looks like." She met his eyes. "I didn't go looking for it. I know," he said, "but what you found may help someone else who's still walking through it." He handed her a flyer. "Student Leadership Panel. Theme, Voice. Choice, Integrity." She took it and stared at the bold letters. "You want me to speak? I want people to hear what self-control sounds like." She exhaled. "Let me think about it." "I'm not in a hurry," he said. "But this school needs to hear from someone who doesn't scream to be understood." As Naomi walked home that day, her phone buzzed. A message from her father. "Dinner or gym first?" She replied, "Gym, need to move, not to fight, just to breathe." She unlocked the front door 10 minutes later and placed her bag on the floor. Her father looked up from the table where 2 plates were already set. "You don't look like someone who just shook a school system." Naomi chuckled under her breath. "Feels more like the school shook itself." He smiled. "Sometimes we don't break things. We just stop holding them up." They trained that evening in quiet intervals. No lectures, no instructions, just movement, rhythm, precision. Afterward, they sat on the mat in silence, the kind of silence only earned by people who trust it. "I got asked to speak," she said. David raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About what happens when you don't fight until there's no other choice." He nodded slowly. "That's a story worth telling." She looked at her wrapped knuckles. "It doesn't feel like mine anymore. It feels bigger." "It is," he said. "Because the way you stood in it, others saw something they didn't know was possible." "Like what?" "Like strength without aggression, grace without submission, and most of all, peace without permission." The next week, the auditorium filled with more students than expected. Faculty lined the walls. Parents sat in folding chairs. No one knew exactly what to expect. Then Naomi walked onto the stage. She didn't wear anything flashy. No makeup, no polish, just herself. She stepped to the mic and paused. Not for effect, but for presence. "I wasn't planning to speak today," she began, "because most of the time people don't really listen. They just wait for their turn to talk. But a few days ago, people listened. Maybe not because they wanted to, but because silence had stretched so long they didn't know what else to do." She let that breathe. "Someone once told me that real strength isn't about overpowering anyone. It's about being able to stand when you're outnumbered, outmatched, and still choose how you carry yourself." I've been silent for a long time, not because I was scared, but because I was waiting for the moment when standing still could say more than swinging first. She looked out at the audience. "I didn't come to Ridgewood to make noise. I came to finish a chapter. But sometimes the chapter finishes you. It shows you something about yourself, about others, about what happens when you refuse to let someone else narrate your worth. She paused. I'm not asking to be admired. I'm asking us to look at who we become when no one is watching. Because if the only time we act right is when a camera's rolling, then we're just playing roles. But if we carry ourselves with respect, even when no one is clapping, then we're not just students. We're leaders. The room was still. She stepped back from the mic, and for the first time since arriving at Ridgewood, she felt the weight lift, not because it was gone, but because she was stronger now. After the panel, students approached her one by one. Some thanked her, some apologized, some just nodded, not sure what to say, but knowing they needed to say something. Naomi didn't need their approval, but she accepted their humanity. As spring bloomed and the school year wound down, things didn't return to normal. They returned to new. Students stood up more when something felt wrong. Teachers listened more closely. And Sienna Harper. She sat in class like everyone else now, not hated, not idolized, just seen. Sometimes, that's the best outcome you can hope for. On Naomi's final day at Ridgewood, Miles handed her a folded piece of paper. Inside was a single sentence beneath a sketch of her walking away from the circle behind the gym. It read, "She didn't change the rules. She changed what people believed was possible." Naomi smiled. For once, she didn't say anything. She just kept walking, and this time, the silence followed not out of fear, not out of mystery, but out of respect. Naomi Sinclair didn't come to Ridgewood High looking for transformation. She came to finish her senior year. Quietly, anonymously. She had no interest in fitting in ruling the cafeteria, or in collecting approval. Like currency. All she wanted was to exist on her terms under the radar, untouched by the noise and politics of high school. Power dynamics. But sometimes we don't choose when we change the room, we simply become the reason it changes. Naomi's journey began in silence, not the silence of fear or uncertainty, but the kind carved through experience, the kind that doesn't beg to be understood. She had survived other cities, other schools, and the consequences of power misused against her. She had already fought, already lost, already learned. So when Ridgewood began its slow and familiar cycle, the whispers, the mocking, the tests of dominance, Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't escalate. She endured. Not with weakness, but with control. The more she refused to give them what they wanted, a reaction, a breakdown, a plea for mercy, the more threatening she became. Because what bullies fear most is not a scream or a shove, it's indifference. Her presence alone became a mirror, forcing people to see themselves in ways they hadn't before. It unnerved them. Especially Sienna Harper, the school's unspoken queen who relied not on violence, but on influence, image, and manipulation. Naomi's refusal to play by her rules was a kind of rebellion. Sienna didn't know how to suppress, and yet Naomi never sought war. She simply walked her own line, calm, composed, observing everything. She journaled each encounter, not to seek revenge, but to understand the rhythm of what was happening. She chose awareness over aggression, stillness over spectacle, until the moment came when stillness was no longer protection, but invitation. The trap was set, a circle behind the gym. No teachers, no cameras, just noise, expectation, and the unspoken demand for submission. The crowd thought they were about to witness a takedown. Instead, they witnessed a shift. What unfolded wasn't a fight. It was a dismantling of every assumption they held about strength. Naomi didn't posture, didn't rage. She moved with precision and efficiency, defending herself with a kind of grace that didn't humiliate it, revealed she didn't seek to destroy her attackers. She neutralized them. In a matter of minutes, the hierarchy that had dominated Ridgewood collapsed not with blood or broken bones, but with truth. The truth that real power doesn't scream, it listens. The aftermath was quiet, and that was the greatest change of all. The school that once thrived on whispers, exclusion, and performance began to pause, reflect, and adjust. Naomi didn't demand leadership but became a leader nonetheless. Her presence reminded others of what was possible when someone chose their principles over their pride. Even Sienna, once the symbol of social control, found herself navigating unfamiliar terrain, not hatred, but invisibility. For someone who had been at the center of attention for so long, being unseen was the most humbling form of consequence. Naomi never gloated. She didn't step into the spotlight. She didn't try to sit where Sienna once sat. She had already outgrown the throne. She chose integrity instead. In the weeks that followed, Ridgewood began to evolve. Students stood up more often for one another. Teachers listened more carefully. Even those who once mocked Naomi started asking her questions, not just about the fight, but about the choice behind her silence. She was no longer a symbol of fear. She became a symbol of restraint, dignity, and self-definition. She spoke once at a student leadership panel, and it was enough. Her words were not poetic. They were not dramatic, but they were real. She talked about what it meant to hold your power without crushing others beneath it, what it means to let your silence carry strength without shame, what it means to stand not for applause but because it's the only thing left to do when walking away would betray who you are. And that was Naomi's true victory. Not the takedown, not the moment. The crowd gasped. But the slow rippling effect of her refusal to compromise her sense of self, even under pressure, even when outnumbered, even when misunderstood. So what can we learn from her story? What do we as viewers carry with us when the video ends and real life resumes? We live in a world addicted to noise, a world that rewards performance, reaction, and outrage, a world that often mistakes volume for value and drama for depth. But Naomi's story reminds us of another path, a quieter one, a stronger one. She reminds us that silence can be sacred, that discipline is more powerful than dominance, that walking away can be an act of courage, not cowardice. And when the time does come to act to stand, to speak to defend our response, can be clean, measured, purposeful, not to humiliate, not to harm, but to end the harm. In your own life, this could mean choosing not to engage with toxic people trying to bait you into an argument. It could mean walking away from a workplace culture that thrives on gossip and manipulation. It could mean stepping up to protect someone who hasn't yet found their voice and doing it without turning into the very thing you're standing against. Naomi didn't win because she fought well. She won because she waited well, because she stayed rooted in who she was until it was time to remind everyone else that kind of strength doesn't fade, it echoes. And now, we invite you to echo it too. Here's a question to reflect on, and we'd love for you to answer in the comments below. If you were in Naomi's position, facing constant provocation and pressure, how would you respond? Stay silent, observe, and wait until the right moment to respond with strength and control. Or confront directly early on, pushing back quickly to defend your space and prove your point. Share your thought in the comments section. We're building a community where your thoughts and experiences matter, so let's learn from each other. And if Naomi's story moved you, if it made you think or even gave you a moment of pause, please take a second to subscribe to this channel. Every subscriber, every like, every share helps us grow and keep producing powerful, meaningful content. Creating stories like this isn't easy. It takes time, Research and care, especially at the beginning when budgets are tight and visibility is a challenge. If you feel called to support our work more directly, we humbly welcome donations to help us keep going. Every dollar helps us build the kind of media that uplifts, inspires, and tells the stories the world needs to hear. Let us know in the comments what your takeaways are from Naomi's journey. Do you see yourself in her? Or maybe in Sienna? Do you believe people can truly change? Share your perspective below. We're all learning, growing, and evolving together. Thank you for watching. And until the next story, stay grounded, stay kind, and when the storm comes, be the calm in the middle of it.